Taisui Xingjun, also known as Yin Jiao, terrifying deity and sunbathing fanatic. But what about the Taisui of Fate Grand Order? How well does he compare to his mythical counterpart, and what grade would I give his depiction? Let's find out. Obligatory disclaimer about me being bad at pronouncing things from tonal languages. Please don't kill me if I screw up. Thanks. Taisui is an alter ego class servant, and the first servant I am covering who can be summoned as an alter ego, or rather given to you as an event reward. Since that is the case, it may be worth defining what an alter ego is, since it can be a bit confusing. An alter ego class is a servant that is a single aspect of a being, such as a specific personality trait, that has been split off from its original source, which then becomes its own being separate from the original. The first example of this are the Sakura 5 who split off from BB. These characters like Melt and Passionlip then also had several divinities added to their spirit origins, transforming them into something called a high servant. In Melt's case, she has the Greek goddess Artemis, the biblical sea monster Leviathan, and the Hindu goddess Sarasvati. Generally speaking, the alter ego class servants we get in Fate Grand Order are either separate beings that have split off from the original, like the Mecha Ellis, high servants consisting of a fusion of multiple divinities like Sitonai, or a cross of both like the Sakura 5. I hope all of that made some sense. For me, this is the most confusing class in the Fate franchise. So where does Taisui Xingjun fit into all this? Well, he's actually not like most other alter egos. Whereas alter egos like Melt or Sitonai have several deities fused into one mortal body, Taisui Xingjun is a fusion of several mortals into one divine body, in this case the Kon that lived on the island from the Water Monster Crisis event. This is actually really clever, since Taisui Xingjun itself is a name for a collective group of 60 deities connected to something called the Sexagenary Cycle. I'll be saying more about that later. It's way too much to get into now. So while Taisui Xingjun is kind of the opposite of a high servant, he is still a combination of multiple different beings fused into one body. So based on that, alter ego sounds like a good class choice for him. At the very least, I'm not sure what else would suit him. Getting into his character design, Taisui is done by the same artist as the Chung sisters, and so has that Pokemon vibe since that's what the artist is used to drawing. I thought I'd make that clear right away due to how many comments were left asking about that in the Chung sisters video. Anyway, while Taisui is an event servant, he does have two forms, one who is younger and more goofy, and his older, more ominous self. Taisui Xingjun in Chinese mythology is a collective group of 60 deities, with one central deity who leads them, Yin Jiao. In Japan, these are all merged into that one central being, Taisaishin. Yin Jiao is described as having 6 arms and 3 heads. While Taisui clearly doesn't have 3 heads, he does have 6 arms, which you can most clearly see during his MP animation. Yin Jiao is also said to possess a bell, the Bell of Fallen Souls, which, when rung, can rip the souls from his enemies. If you look at Taisui's skill and attack animations, he does regularly ring a bell to either use his skills or to cause damage. His design gives us a very otherworldly appearance, making it clear that this guy isn't really human. One last thing, if you look at his final ascension image, you will notice that his arms and legs have these black line tattoos on them. These are Ba Guo trigrams, which are symbols connected to feng shui, Chinese astrology, and a whole bunch of other things, many of which link directly back to Taisui. With all of these links and references to the original, even if it may look different from his usual depictions, I'd say Taisui Xingjun has a very solid design here. Moving into a skill set, Taisui's first skill is Jupiter's Reflection, which increases arts card effectiveness and MP gain for all allies for 3 turns, as well as granting critical stars per turn for 3 turns. Taisui Xingjun is a deity that represents Taisui, or a celestial body said to be a reflection of Jupiter, which is what this skill's name is. Well, that was easy. Taisui's second skill is Shio, giving a one-time guts for 3 turns, a one-time debuff immunity for 3 turns, and a one-time buff removal resistance for 3 turns. All of this to himself or an ally of his choosing. Shio, or Feng, is a giant flesh monster with 2 eyes found buried underground. It is said that if you eat parts of it, it may grant you longevity, even eternal youth. Also, the Shio will always grow back, effectively being a limitless supply of food. The catch is that uncovering a Shio may also be a warning of impending disaster. More on this later. We actually see Shio during the Water Monster Crisis event, once Melt draws in all the floodwaters to reveal the true nature of the island. Notably, Shio is thought to be the earthly manifestation of Taisui, and so that's how these two beings are related. Naturally, this too is a solid skill for Taisui. Lastly, Taisui's third skill is Ominous God, which inflicts skill seal for a turn to all enemies, as well as increasing his MP strength for 3 turns. Oh, and it's also an MP charge. Taisui Xingjun, or Yin Jiao, is said to be a malevolent god that brings curses and disasters. Astronomers would pay careful attention to the position of celestial bodies, trying to find clues that might help them avoid the mayhem that Yin Jiao causes. That does sound like an ominous god to me. And relating to that, Taisui Xingjun's noble phantasm is Taisui Awakens, whereupon he taps into his dark powers, summons a giant orb, and then unleashes a terrible curse upon his foes. This MP inflicts a special debuff, Taisui's Calamity, which decreases defense, inflicts curse, and inflicts disastrous curse to all enemies for 3 turns when the target afflicted by this debuff dies. This debuff hits all enemies, as does a 5-turn curse, and the MP itself does damage to all enemies, with heavy damage to human enemies depending upon overcharge. So that special debuff doesn't really mean anything if Taisui just kills everything outright, but it can be quite effective in certain challenge quests where you have to kill lots of weak enemies and one strong one. Anyway, so what's this MP about? Well, as I've mentioned already, Taisui Xingjun, or Yin Jiao, is kind of a scary god. How scary? In a book called the Taiping Guanji, which is a collection of various stories compiled in the 10th century during the Song Dynasty, there is a story where a family builds a house and ends up discovering Shio, the underground flesh monster thing. The family decides not only to keep building the house, but also decides to build a basement as well. But then, the house is destroyed and the entire family is wiped out. In Taisui's FGO profile, it is said that this family was over 70 people, but I couldn't find an exact number aside from that. In other words, this MP is what happens when people decide to ignore all the warnings and rituals concerning Taisui, and it's not a very good result. Unless of course you are using him as your servant in FGO, in which case, it's quite awesome. Taisui's craft essence is The Awakening, featuring one looking up from a hole in the ground up to the sky. This CE connects to Taisui in his Shio form. In the CE text, he ponders both his role of cursing those who uncover him, but also what it might be like to go sunbathing. Considering that this Taisui is an underground flesh monster, it does make sense that he would at least be curious to know what life is like above ground. It also gives him a connection with the Kon from the Water Monster Crisis event, who are all about sunbathing and enjoying life. When you think about it, you could say that the Kon are actually living out Taisui's fantasies, experiencing all the things that he is not able to while buried underground. This CE gives us a better glimpse into the connection between Taisui and the Kon that together create his servant form. This is a good one. Jumping into the future, Taisui's Valentine CE is Let's Bask in the Sun Together, featuring some Kon lazing about on some futons somewhere outdoors. This is pretty much a follow-up on Taisui's Bond CE. Whereas the Bond CE was mainly about Taisui thinking about what he might be able to enjoy above ground, this Valentine CE is about actually enjoying those things. The description here talks about how awesome it is to laze about in the sun, enjoying the sights and sounds that one wouldn't be able to enjoy underground. This is pretty straightforward, and again is a neat link between Taisui and the Kon. And now for characterization, starting with a look into the myths surrounding Taisui Xingjun. Well, before I can really talk about that, I have to give a rough explanation for an old calendar system found in China and throughout East Asia, known as the Sexagenary Cycle, or Ganji. Bear with me, this is going to take a bit. This cycle is 60 years, with each year given its own specific name based upon 2 other systems. The first of these systems is called the Heavenly Stems, which consist of 10 parts. Taking the 5 phases, or wuxin, you have the 5 elements of wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. Each of these then has 2 different parts, one for yin and one for yang. So you would have yang wood, and then yin wood, followed by yang fire, yin fire, and so on, ultimately giving us the 10 heavenly stems. Then there is the second system called the Earthly Branches, consisting of 12 parts, which roughly matches the 12 years it takes for Jupiter to orbit the Sun, with each of those years getting named after a specific animal. You might recognize this from the Chinese zodiac, that whole business where a year is the year of the dragon, year of the rabbit, and so on. These 2 systems, the Heavenly Stems and Earthly Branches, are then combined to create this Sexagenary Cycle. The first part of a year's name matches what is found in the Heavenly Stems, while the second part matches the name found in the Earthly Branches. The end result is that you have 60 years, each with their own unique name to go with them. So for example, this year, 2024, would be the Yang Wood Dragon Year, Jiaqian in Mandarin, or Koshin in Japanese. Giving each year its own unique name as part of this 60-year cycle actually plays a notable role in the naming of historical events. I'll give you 3 examples. The war between Japan and Korea that broke out in 1592 took place in the year of Yang Water Dragon, which in Korean is called Imjin, giving us the name Imjin War. The civil war in Japan that started in 1868, the one many of our Shinsengumi servants fought and died in, occurred in the year of Yang Earth Dragon, or Boshin in Japanese, giving us the name Boshin War. Lastly, the revolution that toppled the Qing dynasty in 1911 took place in the year of Yin Metal Pig, or Xinhai, so giving us the name of Xinhai Revolution. Okay, I hope that made sense. Translating all of that into something vaguely coherent was the hardest part of this video. Anyway, so what does all of this have to do with Taisui Xingjun? Well, just as each year in the 60-year cycle has its own name, so too does it also have its own special deity. Again, using this year 2024 as an example, this is the year of Yang Wood Dragon, and so the corresponding deity for this year would be Jiaqian Taisui. The overall leader of these 60 deities is Yin Jiao. All of this is a big part of Feng Shui, Taoism, and Chinese astrology. If somebody's birth year clashes with a particular year's Taisui, that person may face misfortune during that year. I really am simplifying all this for the purposes of this video, but if I dig any deeper, my head's gonna explode. Anyway, this group of 60 deities, with each one having its own year in this 60-year cycle, in China are collectively known as the Taisui Xingjun. In Japan, however, they are one single deity, Taisaishin. Taisui's earthly counterpart is Feng, or Shio, the underground flesh monster that I've mentioned. When compared to other mythologies out there, especially Greek mythology, there is shockingly little information about stories involving Taisui Xingjun, Yin Jiao, Taisaishin, or any of his other incarnations. At least, as far as I could find. Much of what I could find are things I've mentioned throughout the video. The astrology, the flesh monster, the curses, and so forth. Maybe it's a translation issue, or maybe those stories just don't exist. Well, there is one. You may recall that there is a Chinese servant from FGO whose legend involves deities, Taigong Wang, or Jiangxia. So, does Taisui Xingjun or Yin Jiao appear in the novel Investiture of the Gods? As a matter of fact, they do. In that novel, Yin Jiao is the son of Queen Jiang, and so is the crown prince of the Shang dynasty. However, thanks to a scheme by Da Ji, Queen Jiang was murdered and Yin Jiao was forced to flee. After being adopted and tutored for a few decades, Yin Jiao was supposed to team up with Jiangxia, Taigong Wang, but was tricked into fighting for the Shang instead. Being defeated by Jiangxia, Yin Jiao would later be deified and made the leader of the 60 gods of Taisui. But in a different story from the Ming dynasty, not only does Yin Jiao end up fighting for the Zhou dynasty rather than the Shang dynasty, he ends up killing Da Ji, and so avenging his mother. I wish I had more details about that, but I can't find it in English. Now, this connection between Taisui and the book Investiture of the Gods is actually mentioned in Taisui Xingjun's profile. Notably, it is mentioned that Taisui, whose earthly form is the flesh monster Shio, has a link to the servant Neja, who himself was born from a similar mass of flesh. The details will have to wait until my eventual video on Neja. But otherwise, it is mentioned in this profile that it is uncertain if the Taisui Xingjun that we summon as a servant has any links to the character of Yin Jiao from Investiture of the Gods. With that said, if you take a look at Taisui's My Room lines, he does have a few that have him saying how he gets vibes from a few characters. Feelings of familiarity with Neja, that Taigong Wang is someone trustworthy, or that the various Tamamos are dangerous and should be avoided. So the FGO devs are basically teasing us, giving the idea that Taisui might be Yin Jiao from Investiture of the Gods, but not giving us a clear answer. As for story appearances, so far Taisui has only appeared in the Water Monster Crisis event on NA, though appeared is a bit generous, since Taisui doesn't actually appear in person until the very end of the event. You do spend plenty of time with the Kon, who are later revealed to be sprites of the larger Taisui. During the final act of the event, as Melt tries to hold back a massive flood, it is revealed that the island is sitting atop a massive Shio, the earthly incarnation of Taisui. This Shio has way more eyes than the usual two, but this is also way larger than normal, so maybe it balances out. As our villain Dagon reveals his master plan, your battles against him, even with the empowered Chung sisters, still aren't enough to stop him. It is at that point that Morgan Le Fay wanders in, annoyed by all the noise interrupting her leisure time with the Kon. Morgan then helps Chaldea summon Taisui Xingjun, using the giant flesh monster, the Kon, and single hairs from Ereshkigal, Melt, and Wu Zetian as the catalyst. Taisui first appears as a quiet, ominous presence, but then shifts form to a younger, more silly personality, much like the Kon you've come to know on the island. With Taisui as an ally, Chaldea is able to overcome Dagon, and so solve the singularity. Since you summoned him as an ally during that final battle, Taisui then decides to follow you to Chaldea, hoping to meet the Chung sisters again, and to probably find new adventures. He appears to have a dual personality, his older self seeming like the divinity who brings disaster, while the younger version is more like a collective hive mind of all the Khan you met on the island. This younger version is silly, laid back, and eager to try new things. But if things got serious, you could probably expect his older self to come out and take care of the problem. Taisui does seem like the type of character who would be willing to throw himself into future events, but as far as I know, he hasn't yet, not even on JP, which has a 2-year lead. If that's the case, that is rather unfortunate. I hope I am wrong about that. But for now, with what we have, the Taisui Xingjun we get matches the myths pretty well, though he probably needs a bit more screen time to solidify that. And now for the verdict. What grade would I give Taisui Xingjun's depiction in Fate Grand Order? Well, his character design and skill set are solid, full of direct references to the myths, Chinese astrology, and his many different incarnations. As for characterization, it gets a bit complicated. We are dealing with a character that is a leader of 60 deities, a character from Investiture of the Gods who later becomes that leader deity, combining all of those deities into one singular being for his Japanese version, and a giant underground flesh monster that you really don't want to dig up. Based on the information we get about Taisui in-game, the links to those various myths are solid, even if they decide to be a bit evasive about whether or not this is the character from Investiture of the Gods. The biggest problem I have with Taisui isn't about how accurate his depiction is, it's how little screen time he has. The tiny bit we have gotten is good, but is this all they plan to do for the character? Are we dealing with another Eric Bloodaxe situation where a character appears once for a few minutes and then that's it? I really hope not. Because of just how little screen time he has, compounded by the fact that there really isn't much information about Taisui in English, it feels like any grade that I give him has the potential to be upset by either a new story appearance, or by the discovery of an old myth about him that I somehow missed. But, based upon what I was able to find, the Taisui we get in FGO is quite good. And so for a final grade, I am going to give Taisui Xingjun, also known as Yin Jiao, an A. If you would like to learn more about Taisui's boss during the Water Monster Crisis event, check out my video on Ha Ba Trung right here. Until next time.